All right, everyone, I want to welcome you guys to our monthly work comp today. It's our monthly YouTube live show that David and I host, and we always have a colleague or friend of ours from different parts of the country to join us, and we talk about work comp related issues that make the news each month, whether it involves employees, employers, independent contractors, or really any employment setting that we feel like the general public, potentially our clients, may need to hear about. So I want to welcome David, of course, as always. How you doing, bud?
Hello, good to be here.
And our guest today is Michael Jordan from South Carolina. How are you today, Michael?
Doing fine. Thank you both for having me on today.
Absolutely. And before we really get started into the articles, if you would, Michael, tell us a little bit about your practice and your firm.
Sure. So my name is Michael Jordan. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. I work for the Steinberg law firm, and our firm primarily deals with workers' compensation and personal injury cases. We do have an arm that handles some construction defect cases as well, but primarily it's workers' comp and personal injury. My practice personally is split between personal injury and workers' comp, so I can kind of handle both sides.
And let's see, I lost my place here. Dave, I know that the past, year, most of our cases, most of our articles that we've been talking about have really focused, obviously, on the pandemic. We feel like we pick on Amazon and some of the bigger employers each month, but they're the ones that are making the news. And I guess I'll open this up to Dave and to you, Michael. What are you guys seeing as a trend in your practices? Are you seeing a different type of case come through the door in the last couple of months, or are you seeing it return to some sense of normalcy now that the world, so to speak, is getting used to the pandemic? We're 12 to 13 months into this, and most of society is starting to become accustomed to how the world works again, particularly in the workforce.
So I'll say, you want to go first, David? I can go.
No, please go ahead.
So, if you want to turn the clock back 11, 12 months where we were at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a significant decrease in the number of claims that were being filed, period. And I think that's because everybody was at home. And then those folks who were working, who may have been injured, may have been scared about their jobs. Because if you remember, the stock market was plummeting there for a while, and people were just scared in general. But since the fall, I'll say things have sort of returned to some sort of normalcy for us. It does help that our workers' comp commission in South Carolina really never stopped having hearings. They started out doing by Zoom. Now they've taken precautions. We're having them in person. And so we at least get claims moved along. And so, I think the injured workers out there at least they may not know exactly what's going on with the court system, but they should at least have some sense of security that if they have to file a claim, if they need medical treatment, or if they need some sort of permanency decision, that at least they're going to get there now.
Michael, you bring up a great point. In Alabama, our Supreme Court was very responsive early on in this process to keep our court system open, to keep work comp claims moving. We don't have an administrative system here in Alabama. When we have disputes, we go directly to court. But when we have settlements, we can go to the Department of Labor Ombudsman program and have those settlements approved. And they opened that up to telephonic hearings for us. And that was wonderful. We could, when we were getting our clients' cases resolved, we were able to get them approved, and there was no slowdown for them getting their checks and getting benefits. So that was really important for our clients. And I would say my thoughts are very consistent with yours about early on. Things did slow down in the sense of getting phone calls, but it seems like people are back at work. And they are, we know that because they're calling us after they get hurt at work, unfortunately. But that's what we're here for, is to provide that service for people who do get hurt at work. So we are glad that people are back at work again.
And it took a while for the medical system to catch up to, nobody was prepped at this point a year ago to deal with Zoom or deal with telehealth or anything of that nature. You have to applaud the medical community for how they've adapted and been able to deal with a lot of these visits, just doing it virtually. So everybody's coming along now.
Yeah, and we've come a long way. I just made the realization that 60 days ago I was at home in quarantine with my family, and this week I received my second vaccination shot. So that's 60 days right there. So we're coming out of the woods on this thing. We're in the right direction finally.
And along those lines, guys, I think the employers, Michael, you hit it a little bit. I think employers, in order for them to not only survive, but to now hopefully begin to thrive again, they've had to adapt. It's adapt or die. Your business is either going to close or you're going to figure out how you're going to be able to keep yourself and your employees and those you come in contact with safe. And if you can't, then the public's not going to deal with you. Either the government will shut you down or the business will just dry up and you'll shut yourself down. But I think that all of the world has learned a tremendous amount of knowledge about how to deal with this, because just because we get through this one doesn't mean that there's not going to be another one another time. And I'm not trying to be Chicken Little. I'm just being a realist here. But I'm glad that we're only 12, 13 months in, and we can hopefully see the light at the end of the tunnel now that more and more people are becoming vaccinated every day. Now, what does that mean in the workforce? What does that mean for employees, employers? Well, David, what's being built right down the road from us that, good or bad, right or wrong, for our practice will mean eventually more clients?
Yeah, we've got an Amazon fulfillment center currently being constructed about, less than 2 miles from our office. And there's one, 20 miles from that one. So, it's great. It's more jobs for people in Birmingham and our surrounding cities. But it's a big monster, Amazon. Maybe I'll get products even sooner. Yeah.
Amazon rules the world these days,
Yeah.
Well, and if you really think about this, with the quarantine being in most, if not all, of the country for various times, and maybe even still in parts of the time of our country, it's helped to elevate and escalate that delivery online service industry, which of course, that's the Amazons of the world. So that sector of the workforce is greatly increasing, and all of the different businesses that feed into it or feed off of it as well. But anyway, we can talk in generalities for the next however, but we've got a whole bunch of great articles, and I say great, work comp nerds think they're great. I hope the general public finds some value in what we bring each month to this discussion. But the first one I want to go to, guys, is the first one on our list. It's out of New York and New Hampshire. Courts in both of those states rule workers' comp should cover marijuana costs for injured workers. And Michael, I'd like to get your input on that. I have a feeling what Dave's going to say, so I'll let him clean up after what your thoughts are on this one.
Sure, couple of things. So the New Hampshire case, well, I guess both the cases are fairly similar in fact pattern, that you've got an injured worker who over time has significant pain for years and years, and instead of treating with opioids has chosen to use medical marijuana to deal with their symptoms. What I thought was very interesting is that, number one, the New Hampshire case is an injury that was in 1991, and then the New York case was from 2004. I mean, in 2004, I wasn't a lawyer. In 1991, I was still in middle school. And the fact that those cases are still going just shows you that people are, when they get hurt, it can be a lifetime injury. That's a demonstration right there. But, the court's coming in and saying, listen, we think it's effective for folks to get off of opioid pain medication and go and use medical marijuana to treat their symptoms, I mean, I think is a smart move. We all know about the opioid epidemic and how that's affected, so many people across the country, but we all see it personally with our clients. And you can tell when somebody becomes addicted, unfortunately, it becomes fairly obvious. So I applaud both those state systems for approving it. Now, would that happen in South Carolina? I don't know. I think that's an uphill battle. What I thought was important in both cases that you've got the doctor who's treating both of these clients is the one who said they need to go in this direction. The client didn't just choose to do it on their own. It was recommended by a doctor. In South Carolina, that's the only way something like this would possibly get approved.
Well, I was going to ask you, what would be the South Carolina, if this was in South Carolina, what's your opinion about how that would rule? Would it be permitted or struck down?
I think at the lower levels, it would probably be struck down, but on the appellate courts have been very open in terms of what they've allowed workers to do. So, maybe it gets approved on an appellate level.
Well, this will not come as a shock to you what David's going to say about how Alabama would treat these cases. So I'm going to let him take a stab at it.
It's not going to fly in Alabama. Okay. I thought it was interesting that the distinction the court made here. The court wasn't requiring the work comp carrier to pay for the medical marijuana directly. In other words, they don't have to pay the pharmacist or the CBD store or whatever. They were actually just having to reimburse the injured worker for the cost of the medical marijuana. I think that was a really interesting part of the court's decision there.
Is medical marijuana? I assume that's not a thing in Alabama.
No, it is not. It's been a proposed bill for a couple of years now, but it has not passed.
Well, I did not do any research about New York and New Hampshire, but I have to assume they have passed those types of laws allowing this to happen.
I think those are two of the states where it has.
Right. So it makes sense to me. That makes sense if your state's allowing it to happen, and then the carrier is not within the what they call the criminal acts between the person buying the marijuana and whoever they bought it from, then reimbursement I understand how reimbursement's fine.
And here's the crazy thing in Alabama, pockets of our state have some of the highest percentage per capita of opioid abuse in the country. In fact, I think it's Jasper, David, or Coleman, may be the highest per capita in the country. It's the coal mining industry. It is this very tough blue collar, horrible injuries typically that come with it is who is impacted by that. Now, it also doesn't help that they've had some doctors busted for overprescribing as well. So those two combinations, I guess, have created a perfect storm.
We all know there's opioid abuse, both in prescriptions of it and the taking of it, but there has to be an alternative for opioids, right? And that's why 35 states have now legalized marijuana for medical purposes. Yeah. There's got to be an alternative.
Yeah.
If we're not giving people medicine, then there's got to be or we're not giving prescription opioids, and there's got to be an alternative. And that's the way these states are now going towards marijuana.
All right, we can pivot to our next article. Guys, if you're just tuning in, this is Work Comp Today, our monthly YouTube live show where we talk about issues and current articles that make the news involving employers, employees, and independent contractors, typically in a work comp setting or any type of an employment setting. Our guest is attorney from South Carolina, Michael Jordan, and we are moving along to our next article. This one comes out of Missouri. And I'm putting the articles, for those of you who are watching us on YouTube, I'm putting links to the articles in our show notes so you can click on those articles. St. Louis EMT battles for COVID work comp while waiting for lung transplant. And Dave, we've heard about this in each of the last almost 6 to 9 months. So very few of these cases end in a positive way where the employee actually is given benefits. What's your take on this one? This is a frontline worker. This is one of those accepted, typically, and you would hope, accepted positions where there might be a presumption.
Yeah, so no presumption here for Liz Smith that her COVID-19 was acquired while doing her job as an EMT. And I think she works for the city of St. Louis, and she's been an EMT for 10 years. Back in February of 2020, she comes down with what they called then a mysterious illness. Couldn't figure it out. Well, it was the early COVID stage. She got COVID, and her employer denied her claim for work comp benefits. They said, "Oh, you got the flu." Well, I want to read this because this blew me away as to what COVID can do to the body. She describes her doctors telling her that she's got a bunch of holes in her lungs, and the cavities have been formed, and now it's blister-like blobs all over them where there was healthy tissue, and now it's filled with fluid. And that's just a horrible description, but she can no longer be an EMT. Her claim has been denied. She is on health insurance, but it costs at least $800 a month for health insurance premiums. And this is what happens when someone contracts COVID at work, a frontline worker like her claim is denied, and then she's on health insurance and she can't work. And if work comp's not going to cover this, then who's going to help pay for her medical bills? How is she going to get by? She's going to become essentially a ward of the state. She's going to go on to Medicare and disability when the employer needs to step up and pay for and give her work comp benefits.
Michael, if you're the employer and you're defending this case and you're trying to justify why you're denying it, and you've got the insurance carrier, the adjuster talking in your ear, if we allow this one, if we agree to this one, isn't this going to open the floodgates? Isn't this going to create a multitude of claims against us? How do you deal with that if you're defending the case?
Well, number one, I wouldn't do that, as you know.
I know that.
But listen, I get the concern that it could open some sort of floodgate, but we're talking about a very limited circumstance that we're dealing with here. COVID's going to presumably work its way through the system, and we won't have to deal with these claims or this illness, and then hopefully in 6 months or 9 months or whatever it may be. And so if I'm the employer, I want to take care of my people. These are first responders who are out there helping the public. They're exposing themselves not for their own benefit. They're exposing themselves for the benefit of everybody else. And so I think it's just really tough to come in if you're the city of, I assume it's the city of St. Louis, maybe St. Louis County. Yeah. Come in and say, thanks for doing your job. Sorry you got exposed. This is not our responsibility. I don't understand how they could come in and say that.
It's cases like this is why the three of us do what we do.
Right.
It's cases like this that just burn you up inside and make you want to work harder against those insurance companies and companies that make those decisions.
This lady died 3 times and she had to be brought back to life.
Yeah. And most people that acquire COVID-19, they're going to have symptoms for a couple of weeks. We're not talking about long-term care. We're not talking about permanent disability. Her situation is unique and rare, obviously very serious. So most people are not going to have claims like hers where medical treatments in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and she's permanently totally disabled. Most claims are just not like hers. Yeah. But she should, as long as her doctor says that it's more than likely that she got it at work, then she's entitled to work comp benefits.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to move on to our third article of this episode. And the title, this is coming from your home state, Michael. South Carolina lawmaker makes second push for COVID-19 workers' compensation bill. Can you give us a little bit of an update? Do you have a chance of getting this one passed?
I do think there's two legislators that are mentioned in the article. Russell Fry and Wendell Gilliard. Both are advocates for the little guy, for the worker. South Carolina has a strong legislature in terms of folks who do want to help injured workers, who have an understanding about the workers' comp system, which is helpful. You've got on one side, you've got the insurance companies and big business who are pushing complete immunity on this particular bill. And on the other side, you've got to push to get help for first responders, particularly so that they get a presumption if they happen to get COVID. All this is coming kind of late because we've already worked our way through it. But the South Carolina legislature is only in session January until through the spring, and so it's just unfortunate kind of how it's happened. But coming back to what you're asking, the COVID bill is going to get passed one way or another, but it's sort of like what happened in Washington, where you've got this really big bill that deals with a lot of different stuff. Whether there's a presumption for first responders in that bill, I certainly hope so. That would be the right thing to do, but everything hadn't been worked out quite yet.
Dave, what about Alabama? We ever going to get anything passed?
There's been no proposed legislation that I'm aware of that would provide a presumption for any classification of worker on COVID-19. Don't expect to see that bill this session.
No.
And in that bill, I think there's a distinction between frontline worker and first responder. That frontline worker, that's a very ambiguous term. But first responder, we all know who that is: firefighters, EMT, medical personnel who are out there helping the public get through this health crisis.
Like the woman in St. Louis that we just discussed, an EMT.
And
Exactly.
If they can't get the help, who can?
But one thing, going back to what David said, I mean, it really is. Most of these claims are going to be, maybe a couple of weeks of lost wages, and it's not going to be you're not dealing with permanency. There are certainly rare occasions where that's happening, but most of these claims can be dealt with just a few weeks of back pay.
I think what set the tone was the fear of the unknown a year ago, when the projected numbers were millions dead, horrible outcomes, terrible long-term on large quantities or large percentage. But as we've learned more over this past year, it just hasn't been quite that horrendous on a national scale. But that set the tone over a year ago. And I don't think it's changed the thought process of many who make decisions. If y'all are just joining us, this is our monthly Work Comp Today. This is our March YouTube live show. Dave and I discuss topics of the day that address mainly what our practice is involving. We have South Carolina attorney and friend Michael Jordan with us, and we're working through some articles. And if you have comments or questions, either in the live while you're watching us live, or if you catch us on replay, just throw it in the comments, the chat section. We'll see it. That's where I'm putting all of the links to the articles that we're talking about today. This next article, we're moving up to Minnesota. And gosh, this is just none of these situations are good. But the title is Meat Packers Deserve Work Comp Production. Now, I don't think you would call these folks first responders, but they certainly would be, in my opinion, frontline workers, considering what they do for a living. And what was the number? How many total cases were turned?
935.
Almost 900. 935 claims filed. 0 have been approved. Has there been anything like that on this kind of scale, David in Alabama or Michael in South Carolina, that you're aware of on that large of a scale?
I haven't seen anything like that. We also don't have a lot of meat packing plants. We've got some chicken processing factories, but we don't, I think that was a beef or a pork factory. We have some of those here, but that's not what they've got like in the Midwest,
Yeah, we're similar to you guys, Dave. We have a lot of poultry plants throughout the state. Any other food processing plants of size? I don't think so.
No. And we've talked about these meat processing plants multiple times over the last several months, just because of the nature of the business and the type of work they do, where they're shoulder to shoulder, and they've got to just stay on that line and process, and they were getting bonuses for not missing work and coming to work sick, and they were just spreading the virus to each other, and it's just horrible conditions. And workers died because of it. And
However,
here, with all these claims being denied, clearly there was just decisions at the top, just flat deny every COVID claim without exception.
Minnesota did take some proactive steps in their legislature. And I'll read just a little bit where it says that to aid the frontline workers who had to stay on the job, they enacted a change that made it easier for some to claim work comp to cover lost wages or medical care if they became infected. However, this still created a problem because it didn't include what they said were high-risk workforce. And that's the folks who were in the meat packing and I guess would include just about any food processing plant where you're just basically shoulder to shoulder or in very close proximity to lots of people. But what do you do with these people when there's such a large number? Does the burden then, Michael, get shifted to the health insurance companies that the workers, we would assume, would have health insurance?
Right. That's the thing. I don't really get. You don't hear anything from the health insurance companies who are paying for all these claims that they shouldn't be. Where are they to stand up and say, this is not our responsibility? If these people are getting sick at work, workers' comp needs to come in and say something. But you hadn't heard a word from those folks.
Go ahead.
Did y'all read the comments in this article?
No, I didn't get into the comment section. Is that where all the juice was?
There's a lot of info. Some of it I thought was pretty interesting. There are like 45 or 50 comments in there. One of the things I thought was interesting, that was mentioned a couple of times, was, a lot of folks were very supportive that these injured or these sick employees should be compensated for what they're having to go through. On the other side, you've got some folks who are saying, well, these people are a burden on the government. This is why our deficit's so high. And I think there's a really fundamental misunderstanding out there about how workers' comp claims are paid out. This is not some government deal where they're paying out money and your tax dollars are going to that. This is a private entity, and I just think people don't necessarily understand that.
Here's what I envision, David. Go with me on this. It's a movie scene. You've got the heads of all the different insurance industries, and they're all together at a dinner in the back of a room. And the work comp industry says to the healthcare insurance industry, says, "This is your burden. You're going to take this on. You owe me," or something along those lines. Maybe I'm stretching it, but that's just the way I see it. It's this. You're taking this one. We'll take the next one.
No, Michael, you bring up a great point about health insurance carriers who are footing the bill, because work comp is not on most of these claims. Right. And you're talking about billions of dollars.
I'd love to see an analysis of that, Michael, to see the payoffs as well as the premiums and all, the ledger for the work comp insurance industry versus how the healthcare industry's fared dealing with COVID issues.
I'd hate to be a Nomberg law clerk starting tomorrow dealing with that.
Oh, thank you for that, David. Let's get on that. We need to put out a query for that. There you go. All right, guys, we're going to keep moving on. We're going to get out of Minnesota. We're going to head across not too far from there to South Dakota. And this one is Watertown woman wins workers' compensation for a leg injury that later nearly led to her death. And
not just a worker, this is a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you usually hear that life is really just more interesting than any fiction you can create. And this is just, we've all had not similar cases to this, but stories that you just, did that really happen in real life?
Right.
And Michael, I don't know how it is with teachers in South Carolina, but teachers in Alabama go through the Teachers Association, this being a state employee, if they're a state, if they work for public schools. Private may be different if it's a private corporation. But take us through this article a little bit. And this is 4 years ago.
Yeah, this is just a really unfortunate. Again, as you know, truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. This is an unfortunate situation where you've got a kindergarten teacher just doing her job, and there weren't a lot of details about exactly what happened, but it sounded like one of the children threw a chair, hit her in the leg. Why they threw a chair, what happened with that remains a little bit of a mystery.
Do you think he was red-shirted? He was a second or third year kindergarten. He must have been a big kid.
I mean, listen, that kid he may be the next quarterback in Alabama in 10 years. It's a lady. She develops a blood clot in really a very rare situation that led to a horrible, horrible medical situation for her, and with sepsis and just a horrible, quick decline. And I mean, it was just a very unfortunate situation for her.
Dave, have you ever dealt with a similar injury to this type?
Yeah. In fact, I was handling such a case for a truck driver who a pry bar fell a few feet and struck his foot and his shin, very similar to this teacher. And that led to an above the knee amputation. Again, very similar factually here. I'm no longer working on that case because it's no longer an Alabama case. It had to be filed in another state. But I was really, really excited about helping this gentleman with his case. But he's in good hands now. But it's very similar to this, and it can happen. It doesn't take much sometimes.
Just some trauma to the body at the wrong place. It can create such a traumatic impact and injury. But my gosh, who would ever expect a kindergarten teacher to ever have such a trauma like this?
Right.
The last place I would have thought. But our last article is really nationwide, but it involves the Ford Corporation, and I think that this is the tip of the iceberg. I think this is what's coming down with these large companies and maybe small companies as a result of the pandemic, and that's why I wanted to include it. It really caught my attention. Ford gives 30,000 employees the option to work from home, not just in the immediate, but forever. Another sign of workforce transformation. And kudos to Ford. I think this is my take on it, and I'm certainly going to open it to you guys. My take on it is Ford has certainly recognized that the workforce world wants and needs a change. And if their company can accommodate that and still do what the company wants to accomplish that way, more power to them. Frankly, I'm sure that it's going to save them millions upon millions of dollars, however Ford's going to figure it out. Michael, has your firm gone back into the brick and mortar building? Did y'all ever get away from that? Did you have any hybrid work remotely versus home? I mean, at the office situation?
Well, let's talk about pre-pandemic, because we had some employees who requested to do some work from home from time to, on a somewhat regular schedule. And, as lawyers, we're a little bit risk averse and we don't trust anybody. And so we said, we can't, that's not something we can do. We need you here. You gotta be here so that we can work on the files together. Otherwise, nothing's going to get done. Obviously, things have changed after the after the pandemic hit, we were all out of the office for a few months. And then we sort of started making our way back once people kind of figured out you can be around each other. These days, the lawyers pretty much go in every day, and then the staff is on a 3-on, 2-off system, basically, that kind of goes back and forth so that, you know, those folks who are around each other can have some separation, so they're not exposing each other. But, you know, am I ready to go back to full time? Yeah. I mean, it takes longer to get things done. Everything's, you know, a couple extra steps to make something happen. So while I understand where Ford's coming from, I'm not quite there yet, but, you know, I think in the long run, we can at least understand if somebody wants to work at home from time to time, or, you know, a mother has to stay home with one of the kids. We know now they can work at home, and they don't have to take a sick day. And so I think that's maybe the biggest thing that's come out of this.
Dave, share a little bit about, we've talked about this a little bit previously, but how did we pre-pandemic and during the pandemic dealt with our office?
Yeah. You know, Michael, our firm has fewer lawyers, fewer staff than yours does. But we were allowing a couple of our assistants to work from home pre-pandemic. They had proven themselves that they were getting their work done, and really that's all we care about is, are you getting the work done in a timely fashion? So we kind of had that system in place, that process in place, and it worked out just fine. And then when the pandemic started, we just continued, and it was fine. Now we have a couple of staff people that they have to be here, just their job. They're hands-on. They have to be touching files and paper and things. But that's fine. We were able to space out, shut our doors. Our lawyers never stopped coming to the office. We just worked behind closed doors and kept our distance from each other, wore masks in common spaces, and that worked out fine. You know, earlier in the show, Bernard, you used the phrase adapt or die when referring to businesses. And that's a phrase we use here in our office regularly, adapt or die. We give seminar talks on that, about the legal profession, adapt or die. And what's interesting, we're talking about Ford here, a company that is, 140 years old, you know, one of the oldest, most successful corporations in the United States, you know, one of the most successful in the world, really. And for this old, you know, company, this old successful company to be making these changes, these, you know, adapt or die changes, is really interesting. We're not just talking about a mom and pop here. We're talking about Ford Motor Corporation, or Ford Motor Company. So yeah, really interesting what they're doing.
I think we're going to see a lot more news about how companies are doing just that. For example, look at how automated, and a lot of problems have come with it now, that Amazon has become. Those injuries when machines and humans are working in the same space have created horrific injuries. But Amazon so dearly believes and relies upon its automated process that I don't think they're ever going to go back to full workforce. But anyway, guys, those are our articles. And before we get out of here in the next couple of minutes, Michael, the other thing that we like to do is compare a little bit of Alabama's laws dealing with work comp issues with our guests' home state laws. So I'm going to throw 3 different topics out there. This won't take very long, but I want you and Dave to kind of compare and contrast South Carolina versus Alabama. And I will tell you, I have a case that started in Alabama, but has now been transferred to South Carolina because we determined, and this will come as no shock to Dave, that potentially the recovery for the client is much, much greater in your home state than it is in our state, which is so antiquated. David, when was the last time we updated the payout and the pay values of injuries?
So the value of a foot, an arm, a hand, a toe, a finger, Michael, has not changed in the state of Alabama since 1987. Our permanent partial disability is capped at $220 per week for.
And has the cost of living changed?
Wait, say what?
Yeah, you heard him right. You heard him right.
Weekly comp is capped at $220 a week?
for permanent partial disability.
Right.
Now our TTD rate is in the 900s. That continues to go up every year, but you're capped if you're found permanently partially disabled. You're capped at $220 per week. If you're not permanently totally disabled, you're capped at $220 a week minus 15% for attorney's fee. So it's actually $187 per week, which, as you can surmise, is less than the poverty rate. It's less than unemployment.
So think about this. In 1992, your finger is still your finger. The cost of living, you think that's gone up a little bit since 1992?
Maybe a little bit.
Do you think that dollar goes as far as it used to go?
Let me tell you, let me put this in another way, Michael. Your eye, if you lose 100% of your eye, your vision, it's worth $27,000 in Alabama. Your hand is worth $37,000. Your leg, $44,000. Your arm, $48,000. 100% loss of that scheduled injury, scheduled member.
So in South Carolina, and y'all may already know this from talking to some of our other lawyers, your compensation rate for your weekly checks is the same for your permanent disability. That there's no difference there, which just makes sense. There is a cap. It's about $900. It probably goes along the same path that Alabama's has, but I don't follow the rationale to have a different compensation rate for permanency versus temporary benefits.
Rationale. What's that in Alabama? That's a big jump on your part there, friend. Let me ask you, if I want to get a second medical opinion through work comp in South Carolina, is that permitted? And if so, how do you do it?
Couple different ways to do it, because I asked for a couple of them today. The first thing you do is you just go to the other side and say, we're not satisfied with whatever it may be, the doctor, the impairment rating, the surgery outcome, whatever it may be. And you say, listen, I don't think it's what the doctor's saying is right. We'd like a second opinion to go deal with this. If the other side, being the insurance company or their lawyer, says, sorry, we're not going to do it, then we can always file and request a hearing to get in front of a commissioner to do it. The commissioners are typically, if it's something complicated, if it's something complicated, you had a surgery and the claim's been going on for a while, they typically will grant that. If it's just a way to delay the claim because you're not ready to go to the hearing, you're probably not going to get that. So, most of the time you're getting a second opinion either just by request with the insurance company and their lawyer, or if you go to a hearing, you can get in front of a commissioner and hopefully get it.
Dave, how do we deal with it?
We request what's called a panel of 4 physicians. And you have to be, in order to get that, you have to be dissatisfied with the treating physician and need additional medical care. And then you'll get the injured worker will receive 4 doctors, and they choose one, and that doctor becomes their new treating physician.
Gotcha.
Assuming the doctor you choose, after they reviewed the records, decides to take you on as a patient. And I can't tell you, Michael, how frustrating it is when you've gone through 4 and 5 and 6 doctors and they've refused for whatever reason. Typically, it's because the work comp rate payment is so much less than private pay now that the doctors just quit taking work comp or quit taking those payments.
We don't really have that problem in South Carolina. All the orthopedic, all of us are typically dealing with orthopedic care. All the orthopedics around here are taking workers' comp cases.
Maybe we need to start sending our clients to South Carolina. All right, let's talk about, Dave, what does the term maximum medical improvement mean in our world, and what does it trigger typically in a work comp claim?
Sure. MMI, maximum medical improvement. That's the point in time where the authorized treating doctor says that the injured worker is about as good as they're going to get. They've reached their baseline recovery. It doesn't mean that they're done treating. It just means that they've reached the point where the doctor can't lower their disability anymore. And MMI is a very important point in the work comp process for an injured worker in Alabama, because by law, their TTD checks stop. So when they reach MMI by law, the work comp insurance company will stop their temporary total disability benefit checks.
Is there an equivalent mechanism, Michael, that means that or does that for you guys?
Well, I mean, we use the term maximum medical improvement as well. And it goes typically in the same way. You know, once a client has sort of reached what we call a plateau of their symptoms, where their symptoms kind of leveled out, then they have reached maximum medical improvement per the doctor. You know, it's sort of that hybrid medical legal term where the doctor's saying one thing, but in South Carolina, it has to be the commission that actually determines when maximum medical improvement is. Because a doctor may say, I think you reached maximum medical improvement, and then we go to one of those second opinions, and the new doctor says, I don't know, I think we need to take a deeper look at this. We need a scan or, you know, whatever to get some more treatment. Also, when the authorized treating doctor in South Carolina says an injured worker has reached maximum medical improvement, that doesn't automatically stop the checks. The checks can only be stopped by either the client agrees to stop them, or the insurance company and their lawyer file what we call Form 21, which is a hearing to address whether they should have ongoing checks and typically permanency. And that term maximum medical improvement is sort of a switch in South Carolina that turns from temporary benefits to now we've got a permanent situation and we need to assess what is the permanent disability.
It's interesting, real interesting. Last item, guys, before we get out of here. What about adjudication of your claim? How do your claims resolve? Meaning trial, mediation, agreement between the parties? Michael, what's a typical scenario for a claim that's been accepted and now they've reached the end of their healing process and it's time to bring it to a conclusion?
A couple of different scenarios. So in South Carolina, 5 to 10 years ago, it was passed that we have mandatory mediation for certain types of claims. So if it's a death claim, if it's a claim for total disability, then or if it's a joint longshore state claim, then you have to go to mediation before you are able to go to a hearing. And so, you know, once you get into mediation and people start talking settlement, usually, you know, most cases get resolved that way. If it's just if it's just a single injury, let's say it's your shoulder or your knee or something like that, you know, the lawyers can typically work that out and come to an agreement.
Does it have to be approved by an administrative law judge or any other governing body?
If there's a lawyer involved, it does not have to be approved. They do. The settlement document does go to the Workers' Compensation Commission for approval, but that's just a rubber stamp. If you don't have a lawyer, if an injured worker doesn't have a lawyer, and there's certain criteria that are met in terms of, you know, medical spend, then that has to be approved. That has to go in front of a commissioner to be approved to make sure the insurance company isn't, you know, screwing over the injured worker.
Sure. Dave, how does that compare to our fairly antiquated system?
Michael, so Alabama is the only state that doesn't have an administrative work comp system. When we have disputes, we go directly to our trial court level, which is our circuit court level, and we can have a trial on either the compensability of the injury or on the degree of disability. So you can end up having two trials for one case. When we can reach a settlement pre-litigation, and that can be approved by our Alabama Department of Labor. We have an ombudsman program that either can mediate a dispute or has the authority under law to finalize that settlement. But any settlement of a work comp claim either has to be approved by the Alabama Department of Labor ombudsman or by a circuit court judge.
Gotcha. I have a question for y'all before we finish up.
Go for it.
I only did this in March because I thought we were going to talk about March Madness. Alabama's a 2 seed. So, Y'all tell me who you got in your Final Four.
Wait. Before we do that,
What?
are you looking at a bracket right now and needing some insider advice?
No, I don't need that.
Okay.
I do think Alabama is very good. They've got a team. I was surprised they were a 2 seed instead of a 1 seed.
Yeah, as well as they've played this year, they got to go through Michigan.
Michigan's got some injuries they got to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought after they swept the SEC tournament, they would end up being a number 1 seed, but we're good with the number 2 seed. It's still pretty exciting.
Yeah. Oh, guys, we do have a question. It's not really part of what we've talked about, but let's see, Andy Gibson asks, and see if you guys know the answer to this. Anyone know about when people on disability will get their stimulus money? I'm on disability. I use Wells Fargo, but no one has told him anything. Personally, I don't know of anyone who has that answer until it shows up in your checking account or whatever account that the government has for you. Mr. Gibson, I don't know if there's even a way for you to check on that. Have you guys dealt with that issue?
No, it seems like it's going to take less time than it would under the previous administration, though I do understand that.
Yeah. Mr. Gibson, I wish we could help you there. Dave?
I was going to say, if I'm not mistaken, the law was signed Friday, right? And they expected at the earliest that people would start receiving money on Wednesday, which would be yesterday. But I don't know more than that.
Yeah. Mr. Gibson, I'm sorry we're not much more help than that, sir, but hopefully you'll get your money as soon as practical. Guys, I want to thank you both. Thank you, Michael, for showing up on our monthly YouTube Live Work Comp Nerd Out. What were you going to call it, Dave? We were going to rebrand it?
I only asked y'all one question today, and none of y'all would answer it about who you got in your Final Four.
Look over my shoulder, man. What do you think? I mean, come on.
That's 14.
Just one. Just one's all I need.
David is not going to be happy with me, but I've got 2 Big Ten teams in the Final Four, and I'll leave it at that. But Michael, thank you for showing up and doing our Work Comp Nerd Out hour of the month that we so enjoy spending time with our colleagues from different parts of the country.
It's great to see y'all. Appreciate y'all asking me to join.
Don't hang up, Michael. We'll talk basketball.
Okay, sounds great.
Guys, we will, as we do every month, usually the 3rd, 4th, or sometimes the 5th Thursday in the month, we have Work Comp Today. It's our monthly Work Comp discussion about all things in dealing with employers, employees, and independent contractors. We hit the top articles and issues that make the news from the previous month. Thank you for being here for us and with us. We'll see you again in late April. I believe it's April 29th. We'll have another buddy of ours and we'll talk work comp and everything related. You guys continue to be safe, and we will